hope you guys all like statistics as well. These will be pretty quick. So there was a poll that said 3/4 of Democrats would be happy to vote for a socialist. Now, I'm going to get to why this matters in a second, but I do want to get into the article directly. When it came to candidates who were socialist, Democrats were most likely to answer they would vote for him with 76%, compared to Republicans who only 17% would, and independents with 45%. Now, that's important for a separate reason I'll get into. Actually, I'll get into right now, and that is Bernie Sanders does really well. So let's remember, this goes to the media is always calling out Sanders as being a socialist. Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders, Socialist Bernie Sanders, Socialist Bernie Sanders, Mr. Socialist, Mr. Communist yourself. That's how they keep introducing him at all times. And that's because we know the news, we know how they work. They're saying, what's the part of Bernie Sanders that's the least popular that we can keep bringing up? Oh, the socialist part, because if we bring up Medicare for all, well, everyone likes that. How about $15 minimum wage? Everyone likes that. Just go through all his policies. So they're stuck on trying to tie him directly to this label. So in this thing, again, 45%. But again, socialist isn't. There's no one running right now. There's no major candidate in the race right now that's socialist. And Paul always makes this very good point about even with branding, that Bernie is really a social democrat. He's not a democratic socialist as much as he says he is. He's a social democrat by...
He might be. And I hope he is.
Either way.
His policy platform is one of a social democrat.
Yeah, that's my point.
Really, in my heart of hearts, hope that Bernie Sanders really is a democratic socialist.
So distinguish the two real quick, if you can.
Right. They sound the same. They are slightly different. Basically, the distinction is whether or not you ideologically believe in capitalism or not.
Okay.
That's the actual solid distinction. So social democracy is basically like, well, we've got capitalism. Let's work with that and have social programs that kind of close the gap between what the least of us in society have access to. Like, let's have libraries and public parks and public education and a public healthcare system and a good, ample, good social safety net, and allow businesses to do things essentially unfettered with as minimal regulation as possible. Regulate it around the edges to, when it oversteps. But, we'll just tweak the economy so then the economy and the markets sort of become a separate thing from the socially directed social programs. Whereas a democratic socialist actually would be a post-capitalist person and would say, hey, we need to organize our market systems in a way that don't allow individuals to own the means with which the money is created, generally speaking, or in terms of however the nuts and bolts of that work. We used to call it the means of production, but that's becoming fuzzier in sort of the age of the internet, et cetera. So a democratic socialist platform might include things like worker co-ops, mandating that companies be organized in a way that has a maximum and minimum gap between payouts and roles in the company. Like the board members and the CEOs and senior VPs can't make 300 times what the worker on the line makes. They can only make 8 times. That's the maximum amount of difference. You could make laws like that say, hey, we're going to direct the economy a little bit more intentionally.
And so I would say Sanders' policies, to your point, is I would say like 80% of his policy proposals are social democrat. Then you have a few that are your democratic socialist. That would be like taking over the insurance part of the healthcare industry. That would be like taking over that type of stuff. Bernie Sanders hasn't really talked about like enforcing co-ops. He hasn't really talked about enforcing minimum, maximum
even
pay.
His healthcare plan is like not a super socialistic healthcare plan. He's the model he uses is the French model, which is basically socialized health insurance. Right. Let's make sure the paying for the healthcare is taken care of. Still private healthcare providers, right? Hospitals and groups, or I don't know however that
the
economy.
Hospital
system itself is still private. Right, as opposed to the English system, which is like, it is a government healthcare, like it is a government hospital that is paid for by government things. It's an integrated payment system because it's all government stuff. Not like anyone in England has a major problem with that. They kind of really like their national healthcare service in England. Nobody is like, oh no, they're trying to sneak in biotech weapons into our doctors. Like nobody's doing that in England. Everyone's very happy with their government health care.
And what's hilarious about this conversation that we're having right now, parsing out what's the difference between a socialist democrat and a democratic socialist, is that we have people thinking that we're talking about communism. So it's
and
like
none of this is even approaching communism.
Yeah, I know. Well, I know. And
we're not even talking about socialism.
So I exactly. And so I think I think it's hilarious. Again, kind of funny, ha ha, kind of not funny at all. That there are these very nuanced distinctions between all of these things, and we see how the media actually uses those nuances and those blurred lines to actually confuse people.
It's fear-mongering.
And so what the media will do is, and we saw with Chris Matthews, where he'll go, "Oh, democratic socialism, you mean shooting me in time in what was it in
Central Park.
In Central Park?
Oh, you mean public executions of people, political dissidents, someone that disagrees with you in the media?
Because-
No, that's
Who
not
said
what
that? Who said that?
Chris Matthews
Yeah.
said this.
He said that if
And it's
Bernie
like,
Sanders
no, that
was
is not
president,
what
I would
Bernie
get
Sanders
shot.
wants to do. Are you kidding me? No.
Even what's his name next to him was like, no, he's asking for like what Denmark has, because that the big
Because Chris
distinction.
Hayes actually pushed back.
Yeah.
He was like, I think he's pretty clear about the Denmark thing.
Because really the big distinction that we're talking about, which again, when you talk about either democratic socialism or social democrat, it's a democratic-based system, and all that they do is they say, but what about those authoritarian-based systems? And that's all they do. If you ever look at when they talk about the negative, oh, those terrible socialists, they always bring up USSR, Pol Pot, Mao in China, Venezuela. Even though that's a stretch, it's all about what people actually think it is rather than what it actually is. But what they're doing when they talk about that socialism, they're talking about authoritarian socialism. Right. And I would say that, oh, you must be a fascist then, because that's just authoritarian capitalism. So it's a distinction without a difference. But the point is that they're getting in this article is that, and they go specifically in this part, that the percentage of people who would vote that way was down by 2%, talking about the amount of people that would vote for a socialist, which again, no one's running as a socialist. That's like saying, we have capitalism in America. Would you vote for a fascist? That's basically what they're doing.
There is a socialist candidate. We've covered it. There's a socialist.
I know, but that has a
in the Democratic Party, no one is running as a pure socialist.
Okay, yeah, fine.
There
Make that distinction.
Okay.
That's a fair distinction to make. But the point of this article, and as they go through it, they're basically trying to say, hey, it's going to be really hard for Bernie Sanders to win office when he has this socialism word around him. That again, Bernie Sanders is like, I'm a democratic socialist. We're arguing he's not even in his policies really a democratic socialist. He's a social democrat, which in distinction, again, is like, oh, I'm not a Republican, I'm a Democrat. It's pretty close. Uh-huh. But what the media has been saying for the last 5, 10, 50, 30, 50 years, since communism, since we were fighting the Cold War, is, hey, the word socialism has a blanket term that only has one definition, which is authoritarian, complete government control that we saw in the USSR with Stalin, which again wasn't even communism. That was just an authoritarian takeover that was like, oh, it's basically what Marx did, even though it wasn't. Again, that's my thing with communism, that I don't think it could really exist, because communism, as it's written originally, and there's variants that are different, is all about creating a vacuum without a leader, which is the reason that's, that you can get dictators out of it. Again, whole separate thing. But the point I'm trying to make is, when the news keeps bringing up and spinning the socialist thing, all they're trying to do is discredit Bernie Sanders by getting people to think that socialism means this and doesn't mean that. And then when Bernie Sanders has a definition that isn't even what they're talking about, because when they introduce him, they always say socialist Bernie Sanders, which is the equivalent of being like, oh, fascist Nancy Pelosi, how are you doing today? You're basically, you're a capitalist, they're just saying it to hurt Bernie Sanders.
The word is so deflated now. That's the beauty of the whole thing, is it's like it doesn't work anymore.
Well, and everybody's also onto the media. I mean, we just talked about this. People don't trust the media, so anything the media feeds them.
Yeah.
I do feel like we're in an age, especially younger generations, who are hearing things and then saying, okay, well, let me look into this myself and form my own opinion based on all of these other outlets, which we never really had the opportunity to do in previous generations either. So I do think that there's an advantage in being able to have more voices.
The information age is pretty nice.
And that's why they're like, oh, those online mobs are ruining everything. That's why we are being artificially slowed down on YouTube. It's because the mainstream media threatens YouTube with making apocalypse. Again, I will go back to what happened with PewDiePie. The Wall Street Journal took a lot of stuff completely out of context with PewDiePie. They then went to the advertisers of YouTube and said, hey, you want us to publish a thing saying that you are allied with YouTube and these type of videos, which again weren't accurate anyway. And what did YouTube do? Oh, no. And then we had apocalypse. All the advertisers pull out, billions of dollars pull out. And so what is the deal that gets struck? Well, YouTube says, okay, we're going to go with authoritative. Oh, there's a little Freudian slip right there. We're going to go with authoritative news sources, i.e. mainstream media. We're going to give them the default support. We're going to give them 75% of suggested searches so that they grow in a way that isn't accurate to how good they actually are, because we're going to, again, giving 75% of suggested videos to like a dozen companies and then giving the remaining 25 to thousands of other news sources. Right. And so this is the mainstream media. If they're also remember in all this, they realize that if Bernie Sanders wins, by definition, they just lose their support, their own profitability creators. So they're also, in all this, in a way, acting a little bit fascist by using their authority to force a situation to happen to maintain their own status quo and profitability.
Well,
so.
and along with that, right, is we here at this little YouTube show, right, can look on the internet and see the obvious contradictions about socialism that come out of the mouthpieces of the mainstream media, et cetera. Like, oh, okay, well, so socialism can never work, and also we spent 400,000 troops in Vietnam to make sure it didn't work. That seems contradictory.
And the military itself is a socialist program. It's the biggest socialist program in the world.
Like, yeah, and it's pointing these contradictions out. Like, what was the other quote that I saw in actually a YouTube comment that was great? It was like, socialism looks good on paper, but in reality, it's usually quashed by a CIA-backed coup.
No, that's hilarious. Yes,
like that's what it is. It's like it looks great on paper because it would be. It seems pretty great. Seems like the thing that keeps it from happening is capitalists.
Or let's have these socialist programs and then suck all of the money out of them, and then complain and point to how government doesn't work.
Here's why socialism and capitalism, or I'm even saying like this. Here's why here's why social democrats and capitalism can't get along. Capitalists want to shift who gets the winnings to a smaller and smaller group of people continuously, whereas social democrats want to spread it out. That's the real distinction. That's the real big distinction effectively is how do we distribute the money? Do we do anything? Your laissez-faire capitalists say, no, don't do anything. Let it naturally contract and just ball up into
nothing for anyone else.
And then we eventually get feudalism, or we get a dictatorship, or we get some authoritarian something or other, where all the money is held by a very few amount of people who control power. But again, that's just some version. That's like it's either feudalism 2.0, feudalism 2.1, or feudalism 2.2. That's all it is. It's just feudalism. It's just feudalism in a modern era in a new context, where again, any amount of the social thing is just, hey, do we ensure that that doesn't happen? That's all it is.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Socialism, yay!
All right. Yes, and just encourage everybody out there to ignore this bullshit about being an online mob, right?
Yeah.
That's
It's voter
They just
shaming.
mean that they're effective competitors.
Thank you. That's
voter shaming.
I was
Yeah.
like, this is
How
outrageous.
dare you support the candidate that we have all collectively decided here at the mainstream media
And it possibly
he's
feels like-
unelectable, we say.
It could possibly feel like a mob because there are so many people in support of this candidate. Like,
What's the Gibson
well,
McCuck Esquire headline? It's so good. It's just like
forget
a Bernie supporter was mean to me online, and I intend to use that as my chief piece of evidence as to why poor people can't have health care. Like, what?
But here's the other thing, that when they're calling out, what they really mean is, hey, I told an obvious lie that's easily verifiable as a lie, and a lot of people are like, hey, that's a lie. That's what they mean by mob.
How dare you call out my lie?